So, Mshai Mwangola, thank you for agreeing to talk to me and for having a conversation just after the beautiful kanga workshop you gave. But first of all, before we talk about the kangas and the kanga workshop, please introduce yourself shortly.
And it was a wonderful workshop. I had such a wonderful group of people. So my name is Mshai Mwangola. I'm a performance scholar, an oratorist, a Kenyan, a woman who just loves cloth and performance. And I think of myself as a storyteller as well.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful kind of description, and I guess you could add, so to say, further attributes to it. What's the importance of kanga? What about these clothes? Why are they so important?
So for me, they're important because these are the cloths literally of our lives as women from especially Tanzania, Kenya, the Eastern African region, but also you find versions of them all down the eastern coast. And I think for me, they're important because it literally is the cloth that you're wrapped in as a baby. And for some people, it's the cloth they're wrapped in when they're going to be buried. And everything else you can think about, your weddings, your going to give a gift to a friend, it's what you spread your table with, it's what you work with. So for me, it's the importance of a cloth that accompanies women and men through life. And that in so many ways also carries our history.
Mm-hmm. And how are kangas then related to storytelling? Because you said you're a storyteller. Yes.
Because they are literally, I have a version of a performance that I do that's called, I have so many stories to tell you. And each story is a kanga that has a story. So many of the kangas are associated with people's personal stories. They're associated with stories of communities. They're associated with the history of this space. So I think for me, what I love about kanga is you can pick up a kanga and it's got a story. So it's, as a storyteller, it reminds you of the story to tell.
Yeah, and kanga famously, of course, also have jina or a msemo, so a saying, or literally a name in the middle. Why? What for?
What for? So we call it the jina, which means the name, because often when women are buying Leso, so some women will buy it because they are beautiful. Just in themselves, as you can see, they're beautiful. But also because, thank you, each of them has this name that's literally printed on the cloth. And so what women will do with this name, sometimes it's a greeting, sometimes it says, I'm celebrating something, sometimes it's a message you're sending to someone. So what people love about the cloth is just by wearing or displaying the cloth, you are communicating with other people. And so the importance of it, for some people, they don't even care about the color or the design on the cloth. What they care about is the message. So for instance, after I graduated, the first job I got, with that first salary, you buy your mother a kanga. But you must also match the words. So usually it's to say, thank you, my mother, for bringing me up well, or something like that. So it's the association between the occasion, the message, the person who's wearing it, the person who's seeing it, that the words bring to it all.
Thank you. Could you explain then how people communicate with kanga? So you are now wearing a message.
I am now wearing a message, and it's a message, that talks about. So this one would often be worn, let's say, to a wedding, because it's talking about where there is love, there is also blessing, the kind of thing. So what would happen is that a woman would have a stock of leso or kanga, both words are used. And when you're going into a space where you want to communicate the message, you either wear it or you display it. And people who come into that space or who see you read the message, read the context based on who is wearing it, and they interpret it. So the most interesting situations is where the message is very ambiguous. So somebody could put a message that is communicating something to somebody whom they respect too much to say it outright. So for example, my mother has spoken to me harshly. My mother-in-law has done something I don't like. A neighbor who is, somebody I have to respect is getting on my nerves. So I cannot tell that person directly. But I can wear a leso that says something about, your sharp tongue is not, or if you continue like that, I will do something, or say something about, people who do bad things happen to them. And when I pass into that space, the person will read the message, or other people will know that I am saying this about someone. And again, if a young man is in love with a young woman and he offers her a kanga and she wears it and people see it, people know, oh, there's something happening with this young woman. So that's how they are often used.
Okay. And what if the neighbor then jumps on you and says, what are you sending me? What kind of message is that?
You see, a neighbor would not do that because when I wear it, I did not say who it was for. So if a neighbor jumps on me, everybody will take my side because they will say, why do you think it is you? What have you done to her? What the neighbor would most likely do is look for a leso that responds. And usually that would go on until one of us signals a truce, or maybe somebody else will come in, somebody we both respect, wearing a leso that also says something like, let us all live in peace with each other. But it's a way of people dealing with conflict without actually saying words or violently doing something that would cause harm. Because I can always say that it wasn't meant for you. But, if you think it fits, think about it.
It makes people think. Yeah.
Yes, it makes people think.
Yeah. So now you were just giving this beautiful workshop where you also made us design our own kangas, thinking about the basic elements of design. What makes a kanga? What needs to be there? We already talked about the message. What else?
We talked about the message. We talked about the motifs. So kangas have got, the beautiful thing about, if you look at kangas, there are literally thousands of designs. And yet you see the same patterns being repeated again. So I think for me, what is so innovative about the design is that, so for example, the one I'm wearing, you will see dots. Dots get in many kangas. This is the korosho, the cashew. It gets repeated in many kangas. And it really is about how you place them, how you repeat them, the patterns that you make. So that's one element. Some people love the colors. So some are darker, some are lighter. So sometimes the color itself would communicate something. And then also people would wear the kangas depending on, so some kangas actually have no message. So this one is one that has no message. But that design itself is associated with something. So when you put the elements, literally the thing I love, I think, best about kanga is in its simplicity, it is so complex. It's got layers and layers and layers. Yeah. So you can choose what you want to amplify, and maybe somebody else will be looking at the same kanga and reading something completely different. And so it's that complexity that I think communicates so much.
In the cluster here, in the cluster Africa Multiple, we are very much concerned with different epistemologies. So thinking about different ways of producing knowledge and how colonial knowledge, or a kind of a knowledge system that started during colonial times, has been too dominant, and other ways of communication, of passing on knowledge, of history have been sidelined. Does the kanga is the kanga kind of another carrier of knowledge, history, conversations?
Yes. And actually, I started by saying I'm a performance scholar, and what we use the word perform in performance studies to mean how people make knowledge. And performance studies as a discipline comes out in the 70s. Around the same time, the other word I used was oratorist, that in the African Academy, we're talking about orature, not just as oral literature, but what I define it to be is the transcending of boundaries in the making of meaning. And performance scholars are always saying beyond written text or alongside written text, as you literally see in kanga, how else do people make meaning? What I find so interesting is that as we've moved into the 21st century, people are breaking away from written text. So now people are using screens, people are really thinking about all the different ways that we can communicate. And for me, when I'm teaching and I'm working especially with younger people who are looking for how else can we make meaning in the world, how can we store it, how can we engage with it, kanga is the perfect entry to say that literally for over a century, people have been using kanga. So for example, this piece of cloth carries the history of the Indian Ocean in it. or a kanga can be passed down a family line, and it has your family history in it. So beginning to say that not only as individuals, but as the African Academy in particular, as people in the world, we can use kanga as a doorway to think about how we communicate without speaking or necessarily writing in the way that we know writing to be.
I mean, that's great, and I think you are such an interesting person also to think about that, since you are both a scholar as well as a performer, which I think you also very much highlighted in the performance lecture, which, we all felt like you are putting a mirror to our faces, but you're also kind of really encouraging us to explore something else. Could you tell us a bit about the other many projects in which you've been kind of exploring other forms of knowledge through performance, other forms of history? You've been involved in so many different things.
Oh gosh, some of them, which one?
Too many.
But no, for me, I define myself as a storyteller because very early I thought the thing that connected everything I wanted to do was the stories that people tell. And going back to how we read the world, especially within the academy, I am used to doing research that comes to me there's a way we code our words, there's a way we do research. And I found stories in any form to be able to get people to talk about multiple things. So we have run for the last 3 years as part of a group I'm with called the Orature Collective. We call it a book cafe. People come, they have coffee. We have a coffee master called Andrea Mora who teaches us about coffee. But we also read a book. And we don't just read the book, we enter the world. So we do not do the standard book reading. We perform the book. And then the people who come, and we literally have no idea who's going. It's a coffee house, it's open. Anybody can walk in. They might find themselves being put into in the role of a character. They might find themselves literally in the performance, or we might set up a text, part of the text, and they have to make a judgment, right? So the idea is to get people to see literature not just as a storybook to entertain themselves, but as an entry into the world. I also do projects. I work with civil society a lot. I chair the board of Uraya, which is the biggest non-state civic education facilitator in Kenya. And a project that's close to my heart are scenarios. So often people think in 10 years, in Kenya, the politicians think in 5-year spans, 10-year spans. Scenarios take you into building a world 50, 100 years into the future. And when people work with the countries they live in or the communities they live in, not in the today and the now, but the community that their grandchildren will inherit, then you begin to say, what do I need to do now to make sure they will inherit the future I want them to inherit? Also bearing in mind, scenarios give you alternatives. So we always like to think, Kenya Vision 2030 would be this amazing country. But then the other story is in 2030 we might not exist. We might have, and because we could have become the East African community, as we are saying we are working towards, or because we had civil war, and people don't want to consider that. So building stories with communities that allow them to see that the choices they make now affects their grandchildren's future. That's another project that I'm very, very invested in. Yeah.
So you kind of invite people really to imagine.
Yes.
And to think big.
Yes, and we start by doing a deep dive into the history. And so people can see this is the trend we've been on for the last 100 years. If we continue like this is where we're heading. But if we change, we can go into this area. So the one thing that happens, people know their history differently. The other thing that happens is we try to bring people who normally don't talk to each other. So you also realize, I can't fight with people who live in my community because we have to live this thing together. If there's a war, that bullet will not know, that I have this political belief or that political belief. And so you can build relationships with people you don't know.
So this was actually a question I was just thinking about, like, how is the past then connected to the future? Because I also saw it very much, you refer to kanga in so many different ways. So the practice in the present, what it means also for probably thinking about one's identity as a woman, as an East African. But then on the other hand, you link it also so much to a broader Indian Ocean kind of context. Could you comment on that a bit?
Yeah. So I always have thought of the present as this space that's a bridge. And there are things from the past we must know and we can learn from that we want to pass on to the future. So if you look at the history of kanga, for example, this is a piece of cloth that emerged in an era of globalization, which was not hierarchical, right? You have everybody, communities from everywhere, from Indonesia all the way down to Mozambique. And all of them are meeting, they're exchanging, they're doing all sorts of things. Some of them are great military powers. But China will come to let's say to Lamu, as we know, Dragonfly Sea as a book by Yvonne O'War explores. They come in, they come and exchange and they go away. And there's a space of respect and that teaches us something about, when we talk about globalization today, we're thinking of hierarchies, we're thinking of what can I take so that you have less and I have more. And I think it's lessons like that when we go back and we say, kanga came out of this exchange. What is it that it can teach us about the future that we inherit? What are the messages that have come down to us over the cloth? So for me, the present, there's a symbol I love from the Akan comes from the Adinkra cloth, that's a Sankofa. And Sankofa is a bird that's flying into the future, but its head is looking back into the past, and its body is in the present. So for me, the performances that I do are always anchored in a past that I don't want to go back into, but I'm always saying I'm heading into the future. And I may not get to the future, but you see birds also lay eggs, and those eggs roll on into the future, right? So you must always have that eye of where I came from, but also where we are going as a people.
Yeah, I mean, beautiful. That's a beautiful kind of image of it. I think that captures it very well. Also giving a very central position, I mean, here to symbols, but of course then also to stories, right? So what is next then for you? What's the next project going to be?
So, first of all, this project was supposed to be a small one. It actually started out of my own interest. I wanted to know the history. And then I began meeting people who were Kenyans like me, but didn't even know how to read kanga, especially this generation. So now I do workshops. And now it's turning into a book. I do not want to just publish books. So my commitment is that every chapter in the book has a performance element, which is either a storytelling show, a workshop, or something. And so the dream is to complete that project and to be able to have the companions together, because like kanga, you can't just have text, you must have all of this. This is part of a larger project I call Common Treasures, that a group of us have been working with, and each of these looks at something we have inherited from the past. So something like the language Kiswahili, and looking at what is it telling us for the future. Kiswahili is uniting a lot of African countries. You can travel round East and Central and Southern Africa and find Kiswahili speakers in each of these. And now Kiswahili changes, right? If I speak, what I speak in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Mozambique, in DRC, it's different, but we understand each other. So that's a project. I want to explore that. I want to explore coffee. Coffee is ours, but often people even call it Arabica, and it's like, oh, no. Coffee started in Africa. So that's a story I want to explore as well. But just explore the common treasures that East Africa has given to the world and how we have shared this, and look at not only the history, but always again looking towards the future of humanity that we are contributing to.
Wow, I mean, this is so exciting. I mean, even if one just thinks about coffee, which is also so much part of the colonial history and of the Kenyan history, which are so intertwined, and now also of a global economy, if you want.
Yes.
I just read this morning, this is really a coincidence, I just read this morning that coffee has been the most widespread drug in human history. So actually far more than beer or any other or alcohol, you name it. Coffee has really been the drug that is also, one can also even think about what it is as a symbol.
Yes. And working with the book cafe with Andrea Mora, people like the writer Yvonne O'War, who's also writing on coffee. One of the things that we have learned, so when you go into the history of coffee, they are amazing legends. There's a legend about a spirit that so wanted to commune with humanity and bring them together, it infused itself into the coffee plant. So every time you drink coffee, you are in commune with the divine, but with each other. There are stories about how, another one where God decides to bring warring communities. And you can't boil coffee and people don't smell it. And so they come and then they sit and they talk. So there are stories that, people ask about what's the value of coffee. People will give you, this is the coffee that the world market sells the highest. But the real coffee that's the most valuable is the one that brings people together. And those rituals that you find communities from Ethiopia to Somalia to Kenya to Uganda, if you follow the rituals in these different countries, it's always about bringing people together. And so for me, it's those layers of meaning that we want to excavate, we want to give back to the world, and we also want ourselves. If you come to Kenya, most people don't drink coffee. We produce coffee, but we don't drink it. We drink tea, which is got another whole other history, right? But to give us, to own, to embrace back our coffee as African people, and to say, look, we have no problems sharing it with the world, but we must understand it and its power first.
So let's have a coffee now.
Yes, that's a great idea, shall we?
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Clarissa.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
talking to you and being here.
And please come back and with all the wonderful projects and all the best.
I hope I will be able to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.